Good afternoon. My name is Erin Payton, and I am the Executive Director of the 19th Century Charitable Association, which is located in Oak Park, Illinois. Our mission is strengthening our community through learning, giving, and the sharing of our landmark building. And we have another wonderful program for you today. But before we get started, just want to let you know that at some point, something that the presenter says might spark a question or a comment. And if you are moved to do so, you can leave your question or comment in our chat or our Q&A. And if there's time at the end of the program, we will get a chance to do some Q&A with the presenter, and we might even unmute you so you can ask your question. Now we are going to move on, and I'm going to welcome to the program Susie Helford.
Well, thank you, Erin, and thank you, Annie, for coming today. Our topic is their art in Iceland is pretty relevant for today's very wintry kind of weather, which happens often in January. Annie has given presentations to the 19th Century Club before, and I'm familiar with her presentations also when the Oak Park River Forest Community Associates would meet down at the Art Institute. So you're in for a treat. Annie is an independent art educator and curator, and formerly she was an assistant director of college and professional learning at the Art Institute of Chicago. She has also worked with the Hyde Park Art Center, Columbia College in Chicago, and the Three Arts. She has earned a master's in 20th century art history, theory, and criticism from the School of the Art Institute, and she also has a master's of library science from the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. Currently, she teaches art history online for the adult continuing studies of the School of the Art Institute, and also for the Center of Lifelong Learning at Fourth Presbyterian Church. I do want to put a pitch in, though, for the continuing learning at the School of the Art Institute, because I have taken classes there, and they are just wonderful. And Annie is presenting and doing classes online, which would be perfect for us. So I just wanted to sort of pass that along to you today. But back to our presentation, Annie is always enlightening and entertaining. So we're going to find out today, is there art in Iceland? I bet there might be. So thanks so much.
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today, and it's such a thrill to be able to revisit what was really a transformative trip to Iceland that I was lucky enough to give a couple of years ago, many years ago now, under the aegis of the Art Institute's travel program. So I got myself up to speed on some of the things that Iceland's famous for. But what I found is that once we got there, I discovered so much more. It was really delightful. It was startling. It was humbling to realize how little I had learned in school about Icelandic art. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you these programs. But with this, I present a person you may have heard of if you've never heard her. This is Björk, who is well known, I think probably infamous for her swan dress that she wore at an awards ceremony. She is a multi-talented artist, and she'll make her way back into our presentation in the fullness of time. But I think she's a great way to kick off this art because she's holding a geode. And so much of the art of Iceland is predicated on the natural world. It goes back in history, millennia, but one thing that's very important to know is that there were no indigenous people on the island of Iceland when Northern Europeans arrived. And so their history really begins in 900 AD. It begins with longhouses that were built by essentially Vikings who came through and exploited the natural resources of the island. It was a place where there was incredible fishing, there was some decent agriculture to be had. And what you're seeing here is one of the old longhouses, the ruins or the foundation of a longhouse that's in a quite distant location in the northeast of the island. There are others scattered around the island, and you could easily pass them by without knowing how ancient they actually were. It's such a remote location that before the 20th century, very few people went to Iceland who didn't have a very good reason to be there. And so they operated in some cultural isolation, but not so remote that they didn't have robust relationships, and also a history of conflict with the Norwegians, the Danes, the Swedish, and other Northern Europeans. These particular locations, settlements from about 871, predate the acceptance of Christianity. So there's a pagan past, and this is brought to bear in many of the sagas that are told in illustrations like this one from the Flatjörbok from the 14th century, which looks like a medieval illumination, and that's essentially what it is. Something that's useful to know is that Icelanders, without a speck of self-consciousness or whimsy, will assert to you that they believe in trolls. And so some of the fantastic creatures that you see illuminated in this manuscript are very like latter-day trolls that pop up here and there, and we'll return to them in the fullness of time. When you go to Iceland, they will trot you by these reconstituted sod and stone huts. The village of Skogar is one of them, where they have exhibitions of early handicrafts. And these are interesting because they bear a strong resemblance to things that we've seen perhaps in folk art museums of Northern Europe, generally speaking. There are also some objects that you cannot make head or tail of. The chests are clear enough, beautifully carved wooden chests, like a chest for a wedding preparation or to keep your linens in. But what the Sam Hill are these square rolling pins. Well, they turn out to be called hand mangles, and they're what you do to keep your linens pressed if you're not using them right away. So having ironed the linen tablecloth, you roll it up around the hand mangle, and then when stored in the chest, it maintains its crispness. They're beautifully carved like the chests and full of kind of telling details that show what you can do in a winter if you don't have television. The saga of Balder from an 18th century manuscript, you can tell that there's a kind of a gory story going on here, someone being impaled. And this is part of a very complicated set of sagas that tell the stories of both real people and of deities of one variety or another. You can see that there's someone with their eyes closed and someone else with their face pressed up on the upper left-hand corner against them. And the person who's being impaled is in some mortal peril. It's gone straight through their body. This particular story is the reference of Balder. And here, blind, with his eyes closed, Hodur impales his brother with a spear of mistletoe. This is the only living thing that has not taken an oath to not hurt Balder, but you can guess who's responsible if you've ever had any contact with any kind of Norse mythology. Of course, it's Loki, who was the mischief maker who caused this great tragedy. And the illustration tells a story both for the literate and for the illiterate. People have been fascinated in describing Iceland. And one thing I think is interesting is how accurate they were. There are these eruptions that take place on a regular basis. I think we're all old enough to remember the most recent one that shut down air travel for some time. There are chains of lakes like this. Mount Hekla is famous in both song and story. When you back up a little bit, you can see that the same illustration is reiterated with the chain of lakes and with the eruption of Hekla in a much more elaborate map from the 16th century. I love these sea creatures. Look how insanely detailed they are. A real Whitman sampler of monsters that have been lovingly delineated by Abraham Ortelius. But it's also true that the landscape is about as accurate as you might expect a 16th century map to be. When we get towards what Iceland really looks like from above, here we have a good illustration of the land masses, the fingers that reach out into the ocean, and the places where the snow and Hekla itself are to be found. Northern Europe, of course, exerts a great deal of influence on the manner in which people represent themselves. This portrait of Þórir Þorláksson and his wife, Guðríður Gísla, is probably cut down from a larger image that would have included the full figure of Christ behind them. Þórir was a very important person insofar as he brought a form of literacy by moving a printing press, which produced both the sagas and also religious texts. This is Olaf's saga that was edited under Þórir's auspices while he was bishop of Skálholt in the 17th century. And it may look fairly rudimentary, but for people for whom printing presses were not readily available, this was a great step forward in advancing both imagery as well as literacy in the population. In the modern period, artists were typically educated abroad, often under the auspice or in the countries that were in charge of Iceland at any given time, or their primary trading partners. Jóhannes Kjarval is one of these. He gives us a really piercing stare as he sits with his palette in front of a painting of a palette. So there's a kind of a rebus quality in this particular image. His work is definitely to be sought out. I'm sorry this image isn't crisper, but it's hard to come by these images, even in art historical databases, because people have not done as profound a study of the works of Icelandic artists as they have perhaps of the French and the Germans. But you can see how carefully he's delineated the lichens, the stones, the geological formations that make this, while it is a severe landscape, also rich with detail and color in unexpected places. Many of the artists make much of the peace, the tranquility of these open lakes and the mountains that rise beyond. The horses of Iceland are an important part of that landscape, introduced clearly from abroad, but having been bred in relative isolation, they have a kind of a Shetland pony ruggedness and willingness to work for a living, but also their use for riding. Þorláksson paints the Vita River in 1903 in a style that would have been recognizable and comprehensible to his counterparts in mainland Europe. So this is a means by which Icelandic artists could assert that they too were aware of modern tendencies. Photography at that time was also coming into its own, and this is a very, to me, similar image of three women by the river Ulfsfjörður, which is such a peaceful and tranquil image. Now, if you don't like this kind of a landscape, you might imagine losing your mind in these very severe open spaces. It's not a good place to be anxious about open space, but the artists who treated on it embraced it, and also the national identity is formed through making such images. Goes back in history to this kind of a rugged landscape, which if you were strong enough to make your way through Game of Thrones or half a dozen images, half a dozen movies in the Marvel universe, you would recognize as a place where Loki and Thor and others are to be seen prancing around in costumes. But it's got a much more significant location. It's got a much more significant role to play in world history, as well as Icelandic history, because it is the location called Tingvellir. That's a bad pronunciation, but in my best attempt, which is the place, it's called an assembly park in the language, but it's where the world's first parliament was convened, where people who were disputing over the authorities of Iceland met to create a body that would meet and make decisions collectively. So it has an extremely important role to play in the development of parliamentary democracy, even though that democracy was often supplanted by outside forces over time. The foundation of Iceland's national parliament from 930 AD, or in the Common Era, as we would say today, is surprising, but it's also, you can understand the inclination in a landscape in which natural resources were scarce to come to some kind of an understanding among themselves. In Reykjavik, the main city, some of this history is alluded to in local sculptures. Svensson's Washerwoman is a sculpture that was made in 1937, but is still, as you can see by the tracks in the snow, very much visited today, adjacent to one of the parks in downtown Reykjavik. That a public sculpture should be dedicated to someone who is doing laundry rather than to a goddess or to a national hero of some kind testifies somewhat, I think, to a kind of radical acceptance of the realities of life that you find in Iceland, that perhaps the washerwoman is the national hero. And this figurative sculpture was popular certainly in the 1930s when a democratic socialist government was in power. But at almost the same time, a little bit later after the war, Svensson makes the troll wife. I told you there were more trolls coming, and you can see that there are some rather excited breasts involved in this somewhat abstract but also very fundamentally figurative sculpture, with arms and legs akimbo and a mouth that rivals anything that you might see in Picasso. So while they're at some remove from Northern Europe and the Americas and Canada, they're also well aware by this time of the tendencies and have made it their own with the inclusion of the troll wife. Nearby, Samuelson's Hallgrímskirkja Cathedral, which was designed in the 1940s, but really not completed until 1986, is a remarkable edifice, and it dominates the town of Reykjavik on its highest point. You can see it from all parts of the town. It is almost deco, except that it is also quite medieval. And this mashup of the modern and the medieval is to be found across the street as well in another Samuelsson building, the home and studio of Einar Jónsson. There's something that has a faint whiff of the fascistic in this kind of thing. And I think it's because we've seen this kind of thing designed by Nazi architects, Alfred Speer and the like. But it's well to remember that many of the armories that were built at about the same time in the United States look a lot like this as well, and that it's very much a style that was contemporary at the time. behind this rigorously geometric building lies the workshop of an endlessly inventive artist. Einar is shown here early. And in Philadelphia in 1917, when he has created this fantastic medieval warrior, his work was esteemed at the time. He was obviously exhibited internationally at the same time. But in his own sculpture garden behind that facade, you find insane surrealist sculpture of figures locked side by side, large figures, small figures, and this is open to the public, and people have romantic trysts here and bring their children to play. So it seems rather extreme, perhaps, to eyes that are used to American public sculpture, but Jonsson's contribution to a mythology that is both rooted in the past and modernist is exemplary, I think, of one tendency in Icelandic art. Again, I apologize for particularly bad slides, but one of their fabled artists, Guðnason, gave us composition in 1946 and Farms and Gorges in 57. You will see Gustafsson's work in another environment as we make our way through these collections. But you can see how the abstraction of modernism and international style had made its way to Iceland. How does that fit into an Icelandic vernacular? Well, Farms and Gorges is one way to root an abstract painting in a lived experience. And the longer you look at this, the more you can see the suggestion of roofs and the water in the foreground and the agricultural tilled land in the middle ground. Many of the artists rely upon a relationship with the fundamental and also life-threatening elements of the landscape. So Juliana Sveinsdóttir paints this landscape with what looks like an explosion taking place. It's probably just a distant rainstorm, but that complication of the sky, the way she's delineated the path leading us towards the mountain, but also cut us off from the farther view with these upright strokes over the crest of the hill, is a wonderful way to think about the imminent danger in which people live while also experiencing beauty in that landscape. It is, in fact, sublime. And Gullfoss here, the Golden Waterfalls, is part of the tourist trip that people take, a beautiful location with remarkable waterfalls and a rainbow, which is not captured in this photograph, which at particular times of day and in quality of light, when the sunlight makes its way through the mist, you see this incredible arc over Gullfoss and understand how people's breath was taken away by this space. To get an idea of the scale, look in the lower left-hand corner and you can see little people making their way away from the falls along a path. And don't let's forget the Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis, which is hardly to be credited. Now in the days of Photoshop, you could turn your nose up and say, oh, well, they've just tweaked that in the computer, but they haven't. This is a beautifully timed and crisply made photograph that captures the otherworldly qualities of the Aurora Borealis. And having that experience in real life will influence artists from Kjarval right down to the present day. Being in awe of the world around us is a wonderful inspiration for artists, and having the landscape illuminated with these lights at particular times of year makes those long winters a little bit more tolerable. In the 20s, Finnur Jonsson brought Cubism into the Icelandic body of work. And this is a piece that you will find at one of their wonderful downtown museums, the Culture House in Reykjavik, tucked in among both fishing and whaling artifacts, works of fine art, textile works, pieces of history. It's a bit of a mishmash, but it's also wildly inspirational. And it's a wonderful way to think about how many artists made a living making art in relative isolation, but who just are yet to be discovered by the larger world. And as more visitors come to Iceland, it's a double-edged sword. It's a wonderful way to discover something that you didn't anticipate, but it's also a bit of a degradation on the environment. And up and down the main street now are stores that feature international brands. It's much less the sleepy little village that it might have been discovered in the middle of the 20th century. But the Die of Destiny, I think, is a fitting topic for Jonsson's work of 1925. The die had been cast, and Europe and the larger world had made their way to Iceland. You may have noticed that there are quite a few women whose work we're seeing here. This is Nina Tryggvadottir, whose abstraction of 1963 is in tune with the Paris School of Art, in which color and texture are appreciated and explored. These artists not only were known nationally in Iceland, along with Louisa Mathiasdóttir, whose Harbor Scene of 1987 brings us right up close to the 21st century, but they were appreciated by other artists within Iceland. And what I'm showing you here is the study of Halldór Laxness, who is the Nobel Prize winning author of Iceland. Here you see a work by Nina Tryggvadottir and Louisa Mathiasdóttir, his home called Glufrostein, which is a little bit away from Reykjavik in the countryside. He took as a last name Laxness, the area that he was from, because as you may know, most Icelandic people from time immemorial to the relatively recent day didn't bother with last names because everybody knew everybody else to a really remarkable degree. So these names like Tryggvadottir and Mathiasdóttir just mean the daughter of Matthias and the daughter of Trygg. So you'll see that as we scroll through these names. Halldór Laxness knew that to have an international identity, he would need a last name, and in tribute to the area from which he came, he took this one. Another room in his house shows Svavar Guðnason, his work, a gift from the artist, I believe, along with all of the little objects that Halldór Laxness had collected along his travels, including objects as ordinary as a little celluloid doll, but an incredible library of books from around the world, many of them in translation in Icelandic, many of them in their original languages. The erudition of Laxness is really remarkable. You see here too the mashup of the modern and the exotic and the traditional in the home at Glufrostein. You can see too that he's collected things like brass trays from perhaps Turkey, as well as African sculpture like this Nigerian twin, the Era Idbiji, which is in the collection of the Art Institute. But I show it to you so you get a better idea of some of the things that he brought into his home in Iceland. It's a way of asserting that we're not so far apart, and to show that he is not only an international artist, but that he is aware of and appreciates international art as well. Here are a couple of his his paperback books that have recently been republished. Independent People is one of his most famous novels. The Fish Can Sing is perhaps a great text by which to understand that surreal thread that exists not only in the painting and sculpture, but also in the literature, especially in Haldor's work. These are pieces by Louisa Mathiasdottir. The covers come, so it's a kind of a combination of the pictorial art, visual art of Iceland alongside its greatest literary figure. When I got started putting this talk together now several years ago, this is the only piece of Icelandic art which was in the collection of the Art Institute. And I put that down to Krista Thurman, our former curator's willingness to encounter strange kinds of work, the contemporary, as well as the geographically unfamiliar. So Asgerður Boadóttir, yet another woman, made Orion in 1981. It was acquired not long thereafter. So this was a first for the Art Institute. It was the only piece that we had from an Icelandic artist. Now, perhaps we have a little bit better handle on things, but I have to say, not really by much, because these pieces are not actively collected by Chicago collectors. And it's from Chicago collectors that we often receive gifts that enhance and expand the permanent collection of the Art Institute. So it will be very interesting to see how things change over time. It's also true that many of the artists who create work are creating it in on a scale and in media that don't lend themselves to being collected. Like Olafur Eliasson, who is part Icelandic and part, I think, Danish. He was co-creator with Henning Larsen Architects and Batar Rill Architects of the Harpa Conference Center, which is a really remarkable building right on the waterfront in Reykjavik. And it's robustly used by everything from children's choruses to the National Symphony. Performances take place there, academic conferences. It's an incredible new resource, and it takes advantage of the water on either side of it, as well as its dominant location on the as part of the skyline. But he started small, and this is the first time I ever heard of Olafur Eliasson, with a piece that he made by flooding a garden at the Carnegie International event in Pittsburgh in 1999. This was the kind of garden that had a couple of trees and gravel on the ground. He chose to flood it, and in it he placed this steam-producing mechanism, which I can only think is a direct reference to Hekla, to the eruptions and the volcanoes of Iceland. It was a very poetic piece. You can see how the reflection in the water, which also contains the fallen leaves, makes this a picture, almost a painting, within the context of fugitive, elusive, and ephemeral sculptural work. He's gone on to make many more pieces like this. This is the Weather Project at the Tate Modern, where he took a huge turbine hall and filled it with an artificial sun. Now, this is meaningful for people from the northern parts of the Northern Hemisphere, where you don't get very much reliable sun. But as you can see from this image, people just soaked it up quite literally, lying down on the floor of the turbine hall and basking in the warm rays of this artificial sun. He said, I think there's often a discrepancy between the experience of seeing and the knowledge or expectation of what we are seeing. So knowing that it is the sun casts literally, if you'll pardon me, one kind of light on the work itself, but lying in its rays gives you an extraordinarily different and perhaps more profound experience. Closer to us in New York City, he created a waterfall off the Brooklyn Bridge. There was a little controversy about this because he was accused of disrupting the fish. The fish weren't getting enough time and attention, or they were having their habitat frothed up by the waterfall. But I think the environmentalists came and took a hard look and said, yes, no, it's not that big a deal. You're fine. It was in other quarters a huge hit, and people went specifically to see it and to experience it. There is something about moving water that is refreshing, even at a distance and even in the heart of a great city. This, like the sun and like the steam from Pittsburgh, also refers to those phenomenal waterfalls in Iceland. There are a number of them that are all remarkable beauty spots, and we saw Gullfoss. Much quieter, perhaps, but in some ways no less ephemeral. Ragnar Robertsdottir made Elemental quite recently in 2013. This is a piece that is made out of powdered lava applied directly to the wall of the gallery. Once it is taken off view, it doesn't exist. So it is almost like one of Sol LeWitt's wall drawings, insofar as you don't buy this and take it home and hang it on your wall. If you want to have a Robertsdottir, then you need to go far enough as to create a moment, a place where the work can be installed and reside. When this pumice, which you can imagine is rough, the way a pumice stone takes the dead skin off of your feet, the pumice has been collected by the artist, which is also part of the art, and then applied in a manner in which you might see clouds, or you might see an explosion. There are many different ways in which human beings see things in utterly abstract or non-representational works. And I think Robertsdottir really comes at this from both sides, insofar as it is not meant to be a permanent mural, but it has as much of the beauty and the subtlety, to some eyes, mine included, as would something like Monet's Grand Water Lilies, hugely impressive works of art that dominate a large space. For something completely different, you can enjoy Eero, who is a real trickster artist in the pop art vein. You recognize some of these characters and perhaps not others. I think Freud with a cigar, which is not only a cigar, but also a kind of a neon source for a winking naked lady. Other characters are made up whole out of Eero's fervid mentality. Tank Girl shows up too in Tank Girl's Day, which very much in the cartoon sense, but also in a pop art sense. I think it makes a statement that even the things that we would ordinarily throw away or discard as ephemeral have a role to play in our conception of culture. And so while many of us may not choose to run right out and acquire an Eero, I will say that he is a very popular artist and internationally known, and claims Iceland as his home base, although you may not see it immediately in the work itself. How similar is Björk in these wild costumes and flaming vessels? Here she is in the guise of a forest troll, wearing costumes. I'm sorry that the caption doesn't show up on this. Wearing costumes made by the Icelandic Love Corporation, which is a collective of people who are creating these outfits, which again are animated by a famous person, certainly famous in Iceland and internationally, but so fantastic, so out of the box, far away from Vogue style fashion and much more theatrical in nature, but to be understood as independent works of art as a performance. I love the way the booties are like a shag rug on drugs, the way her calves have been artificially enhanced to become a kind of balloon leading down to her boots. These are works of the imagination that speak to their native belief, both in whimsy and trolls, that are a once in a lifetime, perhaps, experience, and yet profoundly Icelandic in many ways. Two, we have these wild, just going back to some of these crazy natural events, which when captured by an artist are art themselves. We've neglected photography here. There are a few photographs that we've looked at, but being in the right place at the right time to create this image of an eruption and lightning strike is, I would say, a real achievement. And having the right exposure, opening up the aperture in order to capture all of these remarkable things. Sigurdur Stefnusson says that he specializes in aurora borealis, but the eruption of the glacier in Iceland, this one taken in 2010, is the eruption that caused all of the problems across Europe. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do you the favor of not attempting to say its name. Bringing us a little closer to the present day, Ragnar Kjartansson, whose image you saw, you can see he likes to take his clothes off. Satan is Real from 2004 seems so long ago when he was really just a student, but he buried himself up to his hips in a public park and stood there and played guitar and sang little songs in a performance piece, which clearly delighted children, especially if they were bribed with an ice cream cone. He has always had a puckish wit, but he also is he's a great producer and organizer. He is a musician, he is a painter. He made a start with a series, which I think will amuse and horrify you in about equal parts. This is a performance piece which was filmed from 2000 when he was just coming out of art school and continued every 5 years following, in which he stands in what is obviously a very well-appointed library, dressed nicely, with his mother, who every time they get together and do this, spits at him. And he takes it and she does it. She was an artist herself. She was an actress. His father was a director. And so he comes from a family in which performance is accepted and understood as different from real life. But the anxiety which we might experience of a mother spitting on her son is something that he gives us a proxy means by which to consider without thankfully having to live it for ourselves. And she, in a way, in a very loving way, goes along with her crazy son's nutty ideas by performing this role on his behalf. He went on to make a major splash with a piece called The Visitors in 2012, in which he contracted with a whole group of other artists and musicians taking over a stately mansion, a little run down, but stately nonetheless, called Rokeby House, and put them all together to independently contribute to a musical piece, which was then filmed and put together in a multi-screen installation, which if you ever have an opportunity to see it, I say run, don't walk. The song itself is very quiet and repetitive. He sits in the bathtub and plays a guitar, which I'm afraid will never be the same again after being dipped in bath water. But there's a durational aspect to this as well, which is something that he has explored in many ways, the way in which we find ourselves saying the same thing, doing the same thing over and over again, and we don't comment on it, but the aggregate impact of these actions is often quite profound. So they were linked by headphones, they could hear each other, they were recorded separately, and it was really quite an undertaking. As I say, he's a great producer of events. And right here in Chicago, we have Anna Jolsdotter, who is an artist whose work you might encounter. She was on the roster at ZG Gallery recently. She also had a show, the former Tree Studios, in the bank at the former Tree Studios on State Street. And I wonder if you will see in her very complex compositions, which are knotted and tied, but they have colors that remind us not only of Björk's costumes from the Icelandic Love Corporation, but even going back to those paintings that are so brilliant with the colors that seem to be absent in the Icelandic landscape, but in fact are present in the aurora borealis and the explosion of a volcano in the lichen and the small but brilliant vegetation. I hope you'll have an opportunity to see her work. She's very close to home. And if you have the opportunity, of course, to go to Iceland, they've been awfully good about containing the coronavirus and will probably be in a decent place to welcome visitors who are vaccinated and or willing to quarantine and to experience this landscape themselves. I want to thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to revisit some of these artists' work and the landscape that I so admired. I'm going to step out now and let Erin and Susie take over, and we'll be able to answer some questions. I can see that there are some on hand.
Okay, I guess I should take my coat off. Susie is letting me take care of this myself. So let us see who we want to open this up to. Bonnie has a very specific question. Bonnie, do you want to, I just asked you to unmute. You want to ask your question?
Sure. Hi, Annie.
Hiya.
Yeah, it's kind of a silly specific question, but I was interested when you showed the cartoon art. The woman protagonist appeared to have a Band-Aid on her leg. I was wondering if that's supposed to be symbolic of anything, or that she's imperfect, that she's human like us.
You know, it's funny because that is a character that's appropriated from the comic book world. And there was recently a movie about Tank Girl. I think there might have even been two.
Lori Petty was the star of one of them.
That's right. And she is always getting dinged up and getting bruised and hurt and in the middle of catastrophic events. So the Band-Aid is more a badge of honor than it is symbolic, perhaps.
Awesome. Thanks, Bonnie. Well, I have a question. I don't know your background as well as maybe someone else in the audience might. You obviously have such a passion for Iceland in general, but also the art. Is this something that you have found yourself doing, taking one country or one region and kind of learning as much as you can about that one area, or is Iceland kind of a one-off for you?
No, back in the golden age, there were travel programs offered by the Art Institute for members. And when it was someplace like London or Paris, where the curators wanted to go, they got those trips. And when it was someplace like Morocco or Croatia or Iceland, where we don't have strength in our permanent collections, but they are incredible destinations, then people from education would be offered the opportunity to go. So the curators have better things to do with their time than to learn everything they can about a place where we don't have good representation. But it was an incredible privilege for me to dive deep into this. And then went on the ground to be amazed by the things that were in the national museums, that were in the galleries, and very robust arts engagement.
And to your point, at least with my friends, not me, I'm excited if I go to Wisconsin, but it seems that my friends have in the last 10 years really been booking trips there. So it it does seem like the cat is out of the bag with it, and what an amazing place it is to visit and experience.
I think one of the things that makes it so appealing is that if you want to fly into Reykjavik, you will be perfectly happy to explore the town, go on a tourist ride around what's called the Golden Triangle and see some natural wonders, a geyser and these incredible rock formations, but you don't have to leave the comforts of home. On the other hand, if you're sporty, you can ride a bike all the way around Iceland, or you can, Erin shakes her head.
No, I would do that in a heartbeat. I love it.
But
It's
you know
amazing.
what, my goddaughter went with a couple of girlfriends. It was cheap to get there, but it's quite expensive to get housing.
Okay.
So they stayed in Airbnb type places and they ate a lot of hot dogs.
Well, that's
So
all right.
they loved every minute of it. And that was a number of years ago now. It's probably a little bit easier to get around.
And before I go to another question, so you mentioned Morocco and Croatia. Now, are those two places you have also been to, or is there yeah, you got to go oh, I'm so jealous. It's amazing.
I know. I'm kind of jealous of myself in a strange way. I look back on it now and think how privileged I was. Yeah.
But you were responsible for a group of Art Institute members.
Right. And thankfully there was always somebody with the boots on the ground who knew their way from point A to point B. And I was responsible for fielding questions and translating texts and giving slide talks like this.
That is incredible. Many people don't have questions, but they are complimenting you on your pronunciation. I know that you were beating yourself up a little bit, but I can imagine that in the top 5 most difficult languages to pronounce, this one might be up there.
It is, and there's some fairly hilarious tutorials on YouTube where they will give you at least a little leg up, like Aya Fjetlu Jökull. The double L has a little bit of L, but it's got more T in it, and it sounds a little bit like you're choking. If you're not good at it. If you're good at it, of course, it rolls trippingly off the tongue. But that is a kind of a fun thing to explore. There's YouTube videos on how do you say place names, some of the more frequently encountered words and so forth. But you know, the horrible fact is that everybody speaks beautiful English. So you're much less likely to find yourself in a struggle from that. There was one Q&A that I noticed from Mike to say, interested to read a work by Halldór Laxness, and I would say start with Independent People, which is more of a present day novel. Some of his other novels are historical and quite complex. It's like reading a Russian novel with even more confusing names, and a little bit of magical realism. So that's another aspect. The surrealism and the magical realism of things happening that can't be explained can be a little bit off-putting if you're not 100% committed. But
can you say the title one more time?
Independent People.
Okay. Before we go to Ruth Foley, so Ruth, you're on deck. I have a message from Robin Dalva, who is one of our members, and she wants to say hi.
Hi is right. Good to see your name even.
Students. All right, Ruth Foley, I am asking you to unmute so you can ask your question.
I was interested in whether there's another country that you would like to explore their art and culture as intensely as you've explored Iceland.
Yeah, one of the places on my bucket list is Armenia.
Nice.
Which is a little bit off the beaten path. A lot of people love going to Istanbul and visiting Turkey. It's a really remarkable city, but Armenia has been contested over so much of human history. And it also has a very lively art scene in the town of Gyumri. which is not a tourist destination, although people do go there, but it's a little bit like the Lower East Side of Armenia, which is that artists live there, work there, and produce work that is in some cases for Armenians in Armenia, and in some cases is more calibrated to the Armenian diaspora, works that would be collected by people who live in New Jersey or Los Angeles or
Wow.
Chicago. So it's a quite interesting location and really at the heart of human experience in
And
that part of
also
Europe.
one that probably isn't on the must go to for curators, and you might actually get to go.
They were doing it
Oh,
exactly.
good. Here's a question from Lonnie Meekum. Lonnie, do you want to unmute yourself?
I went to Iceland, Reykjavik, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, and I saw the sculpture that Yoko Ono dedicated to John Lennon. I thought maybe you would show us that today.
Yeah, I wish I had. It's interesting because it's not while it's in Iceland, it's not Icelandic art. Insofar as Yoko is Japanese and John is English, but they're so deeply identified with our culture. You may know that in the sculpture garden that's attached to the Art Institute in Pritzker Court, or Pritzker Garden, is Broken Blossom by Yoko Ono, which is a piece that was part of a larger assemblage in down by the Museum of Science and Industry, and it was broken, and she mended it. And so it stands alone in the Pritzker Garden, Broken Blossom, which in its own way is even more poetic.
Oh, that's kind of lovely.
It's a nice.
Edie Schaefer, you had a question.
Hi, how are you? I was wondering that last piece, it was called Uprights. What is the medium? Is that oil or is that?
It's acrylic and ink on drafting film.
On what?
On drafting film.
Oh.
So it's like a impermeable, like vellum.
Oh.
So it has a transparency and also a very hard, slick surface. So it really lets the colors shine through.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Good question, Edie. Thanks. We are now booking through these questions. I knew there'd be quite a few. We've got Marky.
I loved Iceland. I thought it was magnificent. I was there in 2019.
Wow.
And I wondered, why do you think the Icelandic people were so involved in the trolls? Really, I need to know that.
I know, it's mysterious, isn't it? I think if you came from a culture that treated trolls as real, that you'd be reluctant to give them up just because other people said they weren't.
Right.
It's a little bit like the leprechauns of Ireland.
Yeah.
Or any number of spirits that inhabit trees or mountains around the world, the spirit of a place. And also the way the landscape itself is somewhat dangerous. It's easier to blame a creature than it is the landscape itself if things go awry. So yeah, the troll culture is quite interesting.
It's something the whole country can like own together. It probably brings them together as a culture. So
definitely.
It's very sweet.
Yeah.
Nan, hi Nan, you want to unmute yourself? All right, I'm going to ask if she pops in, she can. She says, if you're going to go to Iceland to see the night lights, is there a specific time of the year to travel to see them the best way? Do you know?
If you want to see the Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis, I understand that the best time is in February.
Okay.
Most people from the soft South, like Chicago, prefer to go when the temperature is a reliable 56 to 60 in August.
Okay.
So often people are there when it's not so bitterly cold. Frankly, I have Reykjavik on my weather channel just to keep tabs on it.
Okay.
And it's often colder in Chicago than it is in Reykjavik.
Yeah, I think that was funny that the soft south. We are
Yeah,
a bunch of wimps, aren't we?
it's 28 there today, but it's going to be cloudy, rain, or snow all week long. So I think this is the issue. It's not really that it's so cold in Reykjavik, although certainly it can be cold.
Yeah.
But if you're willing to brave that kind of weather, then you'll get a chance to see the Northern Lights.
All right, Debbie says that she hosted an exchange student from Iceland and had a few comments. So Debbie, let's
Okay.
hear 'em.
Yes, I learned a lot about Iceland in that year. He had such pride in his country that you would swear that it was the center of the universe. Yeah, everything had to be Icelandic, everything. We'd go to the store and it had to be Icelandic fish that we would buy. And everything he ate had to be white. I mean, it didn't have to be white, it just ended up that way.
Yeah.
The only teenager I ever knew who did not like pizza. Yeah. Okay, then a couple other things. Did you know that their phone book is organized by first names?
Yeah.
Because everybody has, you know, son or daughter at the end.
Right.
So you give your children distinctive first names. And then another thing, he said his mother never let him have a pet. So we got a cat while he was here. And so we said, give it an Icelandic name. So we ended up naming the cat after his mother with a nickname. His mother's name is Adelheiður. So we named her Heiða. And the spelling is that there's a D that you cross like as if it were a T. And it's like a TH, like a TH.
Right.
And
well, Debbie, that's all we have the time for. Those are really
great.
Things, but thank you. I love that you have, those are some really great stories. And I would like to ask people if they go, anybody goes to a different country, how about we just experience that country? And not, that'd be like going to, well, I will tell you, when my family went to Ireland, many of them were just very unhappy with the Irish food we were eating. And I thought, well, you did go to a different country. None of my family is watching this. I also say Kathy Bachman posted and says she is half Icelandic. She mentioned earlier, and she said she's warning everybody that it does not get dark enough in the summer to see the Northern Lights well. You have to wait until the winter. So get a very warm coat. Let's see. Okay. I think we really went through a very decent amount of questions there. But Annie, I told you beforehand that this group had some really thoughtful questions, and as you've worked with them before, you were ready for it. But I
have a question.
Oh my, hi Susie.
Hi, I can't figure out the questions, but that cathedral was so spectacular. Has he done anything here in the States?
I don't believe so. And he died quite a long time ago. So the fact that the building was completed in 86, I think, designed in 45, it really, the building outlived the architect. So when you visit anything about the tourist sites of Iceland, they will direct you to that church, and then you can find more information. It's very beautiful inside too, very spare and clean, elegant lines, and has very good acoustics because they care very deeply about music. So
it
well
was
worth
lovely.
a visit. Really remarkable.
Thanks, Susie. Annie, this was such an incredible presentation, and the visuals were so stunning.
I'm so glad.
Do you have Any last comments to share before we sign off for the day?
Well, it's a little bit of the moment, maybe because I didn't eat before this, but I remember that the food was really good. Iceland's really tasty food now. It's not all, shark and puffin. There are lots of really high-end restaurants, and they're very proud of their cuisine now. So between the beauty, the natural beauty, the incredible art, and the lovely locations and foods, it's a lovely destination. Just remember to pack out everything you pack in.
Okay.
You'll be
And
doing
again,
them a favor.
if you're interested in taking one of Annie's classes, you can go on saic.edu. I think she has a class starting up in February.
Yeah.
What is that class?
The one that I'm teaching that starts very soon is called Impressionism, the First 40 Years, designed to go along with the Monet exhibition, which of course has not been open, but will be again. So hopefully people will have it
on it. By the time the exhibit opens, you'll know everything you need to know if you take
That's
the class.
exactly right.
So go, if you're interested, go on their website and look up her class or see what else is being offered.
Right. There are a lot of really great things. And Marky's asking me if I own any Icelandic art. Unfortunately, no, I do not. But believe you me, I have thought about it. and I rue the day that I did not extend myself to buy a Ragnar Kjartansson painting before he was quite such a big deal.
I rue the day too.
Yeah.
Now I do own some many Björk CDs, so in a
Nice.
way, I guess I do own some Icelandic art.
Yes, you do.
Well, if you are interested in our upcoming programs, you can just go to our website, which is www.19thcentury.org. We have programs every Monday through the middle of May, in addition to some other fun ones like Henry Fogel Presents on Wednesday nights. So check out our calendar and register. If you would like to help support us continuing to make these amazing programs, you can donate right on our homepage, www.19thcentury.org. And for Annie, for Susie, and everyone else at the 19th Century Charitable Association, I wish you a wonderful day and stay safe. Bye-bye.